Hey, welcome everybody to this special video. I have my guest with me today is Bill Salus, and there is so much that is going on. We've been distracted by so much news. So what we're going to do, we're going to focus on some things that most people are missing. And we're going to be talking about Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. And of course, Iran's going to be in the mix and a whole lot of other things. We're watching things develop with BRICS nations and currency, the petrodollar, and everything else. Bill, here's this article that showed up just a few days ago, and it's really got a lot of people worried. Oil surges early trading after OPEC Plus surprise unipolar world, challenging production cut. And then there's this article, it's Caroline Glick, a new phase in U.S.-Israel relations, which is quite disturbing as I'm reading what is going on. And we're watching, I don't know, it looks like the collapse of America. We've talked about that before, but let's roll here. We're going to cover a lot of territory today, everybody, but we're going to start with just updating everybody. I'm going to Bill update us on the news and then what to really look for, what's coming as we look at Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, and the demise of America. So, Bill, take it away.
Right. Well, of course, most immediately as we tape this show is this Saudi cut with the OPEC nations and their allies, which includes Russia now. They cut out, the world needs 99 million barrels per day to be produced. That's what it uses. And Saudi Arabia with Iran is going to cut out 3.7% of that. They're going to take out 3.66 million barrels per day. Now that's something they just did recently as we're airing this. So we'll see what effect that has. But there's the concern also with Saudi Arabia is they've got a new relationship they formed with March 10th with Iran. So I want to spend some time talking about that as well. But let's talk about the Biden situation, the Caroline Glick article you talked about. Now, recently there was a meeting and it included heads of state and intelligence with Jordan and Egypt, the Palestinians, the Shin Bet, America. And the outcome of it was that Caroline Glick writes about the Biden administration is currently training and arming several thousand Palestinian Authority troops to provide for anti-terrorism in the West Bank and things like that, arming them.
It's bad.
With rifles and guns, and this is, she comes out real harshly against this because this is all, I mean, these are going to be turned against Israel ultimately. We know that.
Horrible. This is bad. This is really bad.
So under the guise of anti-terrorism, we're going to start funding and training Palestinian troops and making them armed and dangerous and financially equipped.
Bill, I just want to pause here for a second because this cannot go well for America. We are watching what's happening to the United States. It's collapsing. We're just coming down like a building that's imploding, and it's getting faster and faster. And watching how America is turning against Israel, I didn't even know this that you just said. So the Biden administration is giving weapons to Palestinians under the fake cause of protecting against terrorism. I mean, these lies are off the charts.
Well, and also Israel's not in favor of this, but Benjamin Netanyahu's got himself in a real bind here because Biden has pretty much come out against him and the judicial reforms and things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And he's not even invited Benjamin Netanyahu yet as the head of state to Washington. He's dangling that as a carrot on the stick. It's really, to me, Tom, I'm very concerned about the friction that's being caused by the Biden administration with Israel's administration right now. And Israel's administration is a right-wing coalition voted by the majority of people. Of course, they've been going through the protests and stuff that have been going on for the judicial reforms. But I believe that God has put that coalition together in place for two primary prophetic purposes. One is they need to have the kind of government in place that can make those tough decisions to go to war. And we have Israeli Defense Forces showing up in Bible prophecy, going to war, taking out the enemies around them that surround them. We find that in several prophecies. Zechariah 12, verse 6 is one of them. Then after that, when they can dwell securely, they have to have the kind of government in place to make the hard decisions to want to build their temple, because we know ultimately there's going to have to be a religious hierarchy that's going to want to push forward and build the temple when they can. So I'm watching these. Daniel 2:21 says, it's the Lord who changes times and seasons, who removes and raises up kings, gives wisdom to the wise, and knowledge to those who have understanding. So I don't think it's any coincidence that we have a right-wing strong coalition in place right now in Israel that's getting embattled politically with a left-wing administration in the United States.
Yeah.
And this is going to cause a lot of friction.
Let me read. You brought up Zechariah chapter 12, verse 6, and I think for everybody watching, it's worth knowing what it says based on everything that you just said about what's going on in the Israeli government right now. Verse 6, Zechariah chapter 12, in that day, this is the day when Jerusalem is surrounded by her enemies. Excuse me, it's the day when Jerusalem is a cup of trembling. But it says, in that day, I will make the governors of Judah like a fire pan in the woodpile, like a fiery torch in the sheaves. They shall devour all the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left, but Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place. And then it also says a few verses later, verse 8, in that day the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. The one who is feeble among them in that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. Wow. And it shall be in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So in that passage, just as you said, it implies a very strong Israel.
Well, it does. And like you said, Zechariah 12:2 says, a day will come when the peoples round about, not the world at large, not the Ezekiel 38 outer ring of nations, but the people round about that share common borders with Israel, they're going to come to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem. And God will make it a cup of trembling or drunkenness to those nations in some translations. So they're going to come against them, but the Israeli Defense Forces in that day, the governors of Judah, that's the Hebrew word is Elufim, which is the term for a lieutenant or a military leader in the Israeli Defense Forces even today. They will come against them. The battlefield, the imagery is the battlefield will be like a fire pan in the woodpile, and the Israeli Defense Forces will be like a fiery torch, and the people around about will be like sheaves. And the Israeli Defense Forces will devour them on the right hand and on the left hand. And on the right hand and on the left hand, of course, you have those countries that have been Israel's notorious enemies since time immemorial. Hezbollah is up in Lebanon to the north. You got Syria to the northeast with Bashar al-Assad and his chemical weapons over there. Jordan, who's got a fragile peace treaty with Israel, but they fought in the wars with Israel in 1948, 67, and they got dragged in 1973. You got Egypt, which was in those wars as well, although there's a fragile peace treaty with them. That's going to be, there's prophecies that show that that'll be voided out, as will Jordan's peace treaty will be voided out. Saudi Arabia is also around about, and we're going to be talking about 4 prophecies that are unfulfilled for Saudi Arabia in the end times. So what he's talking about is there's going to come a time when those countries are going to come against, and I believe it's Psalm 83 myself, and they're going to come against Israel, and they're going to try to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem and control it and possess it. God's going to make it a cup of trembling to them. He's going to divinely intervene. If you read, you don't have to read it, but Zechariah 12, verses 4, 5, and getting to 6, talk about the Lord intervening and divine intervention. But then it sets the stage for the Israeli Defense Forces to take them out and devour them on the right hand and the left hand. And Tom, I think that stage setting presently
is what's going on right now.
Yeah.
It is just really, I mean, just looking at everything and seeing what's taking place with Israel and the U.S., nothing is going right for the United States. It's like every decision that is made is a bad decision. It's the wrong decision. And so we're watching. We do know that America is not going to be supportive of Israel in the last days. We know from Ezekiel chapter 38, definitely not. But we also can tell from the passage you're quoting, America is not going to be there for Israel. The world's going to be gathered against Jerusalem. So we recognize this. Okay, let's take it some further steps. You have a lot more. What you mentioned, these 4 unfulfilled Saudi Arabia prophecies, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And let's just start working through things, and we'll pull them up on the screen so everybody can see these and follow through with you too.
Yeah, let's do that. I want to preface it a little bit because it's really important to keep an eye on this agreement that was made March 10th between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They were vowed enemies. They both had pulled their embassies out in 2016. Of course, Saudi Arabia has been concerned about Iran's nuclear program. They've actually opened up airspace for Israel to come across in 2020. Now they've even opened up more airspace in 2022 for Israel to fly across, in the hopes that Israel will attack Iran and take out the nuclear threat. But this now sudden things are changing right now. You know, Joe Biden went over there and he met with Mohammed bin Salman. Many people remember back when he went over there and he did that infamous fist pump. Shocked everybody. Like, what are you doing? That's not a typical diplomatic. It's a handshake, a hug, whatever. But he does a fist pump. There's an article came out just right after this Saudi peace deal that was brokered in China, by the way. I want to talk about that in a second, why that's significant. And Business Insider had a headline that said Saudi Arabia making a peace deal with Iran in a deal brokered by China is a middle finger to Biden. So when Biden did the fist pump, he was basically asking Saudi Arabia to open their spigots and produce more oil. And when Biden left, they said, we will not do that. So basically now they're saying, not only will we not do that, but we're going to go ahead and make an agreement with Iran, who's a avowed enemy of, you know, the international community, America, Israel, et cetera. Now, what's interesting that it was in China, of all places. Business Insider had a headline in January of 2023, just 2 months before this agreement was made. It says China looks to weaken the U.S. dollar with the petro yen as oil producers rally to Beijing, and Russia has become an Asian nation, the analyst says, showing the connection now with Russia and China as well. So China is on the hunt. They're wanting to get the petrodollar replaced by the petro yen. This should be very concerning. And we just talked about the OPEC nations of shutting the spigots on 3.7% of the world's oil as we speak. So the concern goes on. You know, Saudi Arabia, when this happened, you know, Netanyahu had been hoping that he'd been boasting actually, that he could normalize relationships with Saudi Arabia like they had with the UAE and Bahrain as part of the Abraham Accords. Here's a headline from the Jerusalem Post in February of 2000, just a month before this agreement with Saudi Arabia, February 19th of 2023. Netanyahu says peace with Saudi Arabia linked with goal of stopping Iran. See, he was going to say, look, we're together because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? The proverb. So it says here, Netanyahu touted the idea that Israel would normalize ties with Saudi Arabia, saying that such a move would launch a historic change in Israel's position in the Middle East. Well, that, you know, ship just sailed as far as this goes, because that agreement. Saudi Arabia did offer an olive branch that won't be acceptable to. This is a headline that came out that says Saudi Arabia offers its price to normalize relationships with Israel. Okay, you want normalization? Here's what's required. The Saudi Crown Prince is seeking a civilian nuclear program and security assurances from President Biden, a steep price for an agreement long sought by Israel. So in other words, he's dragging Biden in. I want security protection against Iran. We want our own nuclear program. You know, this is not going to be acceptable, and it's not going to happen with what we're seeing with the Biden administration presently. Then the other thing, too, that's just concerned is the UAE, who's got a normalized relationship with Israel. It says, here's an article in the Times of Israel on March 11th, just the day after the agreement was brokered. The UAE welcomes the Iran-Saudi deal as an important step of regional stability and prosperity. So the UAE is applauding this right now. Matter of fact, the fact that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are getting involved with Iran should not take anybody by surprise, because since 2021, Saudi Arabia has been meeting in indirect talks with Iran in Baghdad, Iraq. So this is just a consummation of 2 years worth of meetings, as the UAE has also been meeting in Tehran off and on since 2021 as well. So the concern is, how are the Abraham Accords going to hold up now? And how much longer will Saudi Arabia allow their airspace to be open to Israel? Iran's going to start pulling some plugs here pretty soon on putting some pressure on Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, great points. And also, when you look at it, you look at the Biden administration, it's obviously there's a vacuum that's been created for a good world leader on the world platform. And nobody trusts the Biden administration. Saudi Arabia doesn't, certainly Israel can't. UAE obviously doesn't. Who trusts them? They can't. So when you look at it from that perspective, also as we are rapidly moving towards the time of the tribulation period, Bill, you can see God is the one, as Daniel says, as Daniel writes, God is the one who appoints kings and removes kings. And you look at what happened with the Biden administration. If the Biden administration wasn't in power right now, these things wouldn't be happening over in the Mideast. At least I'm convinced they wouldn't be happening if we had a good, strong leader. But God is moving everything rapidly to fulfill his prophetic word at the same time. And with that comes some really bad people.
Right. All the bad kings are in the right places.
That's a great way of putting it. All the bad kings are in all the right places.
Yeah. And I would, of course, we'll rule out Netanyahu. I don't consider him a bad king. He's going to be the king of the hour. He's got to defend the nation. And I think where I'm at on this right now is I think that the prophetic wars are about to happen. And there's quite a few of them. Matter of fact, we get into this in our DVD called the Pre-Tribulation Prophecies, which incorporate a lot of the wars of Zechariah 12:6 we talked about and elsewhere. The four unfulfilled Saudi Arabia prophecies are important to look at because we can look at the geopolitical things that are going on and we can watch current events, and it's important to do that. But what does the Bible say about the future of these players? And it has a lot to say about Saudi Arabia. There's actually 4 unfulfilled Saudi Arabia Bible prophecies, a slide that we can show that I'm going to read here. The first one says in Jeremiah 49, verse 8, it says, speaking about Dedan. Dedan is representative of Saudi Arabia. They were in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia. Some people might think they actually extends over to the Gulf Cooperative Council states of UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait. I don't necessarily know that. I don't necessarily agree with that, but maybe. Mm-hmm. But it definitely does deal with Saudi Arabia. And what it says here is flee, Jeremiah 49, verse 8. Flee, turn back, dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Edom, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time that I will punish him. And so what the first thing they're involved with is they're involved with a relationship with Esau, whose descendants are the Edomites, and the Edomites have ethnical representation in the Palestinians today. And the calamity of Esau is going to happen. There's going to be a judgment on the Palestinian people. And Dedan is warned, Saudi Arabia is warned, when that happens, don't get involved, flee back. In other words, they're on foreign soil, they're in dangerous ground territory, they're involved in, and I believe that the Confederacy, the Edomites show up in Psalm 83 and other prophecies with a 10-member coalition of Arab countries, those around Israel that we read about in Zechariah 12:6. And it says, flee back because I'm going to punish Esau's calamity. And I'll tell you what Esau's calamity is in my estimation shortly. But then it says they don't listen. We found in Ezekiel 25, verse 12 through 14. I'm going to read it. The next one on the slide. But here's the verses. Zechariah 12, verse 25, verses 13 and 14. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will also stretch my hand out against Edom. That would be Esau's descendants, Palestinian descendants today. Cut off man and beast from it and make it desolate from Teman, which was in ancient Edom, southern Jordan area. And Dedan, Saudi Arabia, shall fall by the sword. So in other words, they don't listen. They didn't listen to the warning. They're going to fall by the sword, sign of military invasion. And I will lay my vengeance on Edom by the hand of my people Israel. That's the Israeli Defense Forces. So this judgment, this military war, is going to have the fingerprints of the Israeli Defense Forces, and they shall do that they may do in Edom according to my anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, says the Lord God. And so what we got right here is that the first prophecy is Saudi Arabia is warned, don't get involved in the Palestinian plight. And of course, they're strong advocates for the Palestinian plight. Any negotiating to normalize relationships with Israel was always pinned upon, making sure there's a two-state solution and the Palestinian plight was propped up. They always advocated that. They're going to be involved in a military confederacy. They're told, flee back, don't be involved. The calamity of Esau is going to come. They don't listen. And we find out in Ezekiel 25:14 that many of them Dedan shall fall by the sword. That was the second prophecy. So let's talk about those two for just a minute, and then I want to get into the calamity of Esau and explain what that is and how detrimental that is for the Edomites, now the Palestinians.
So I look at all of these different prophecies that you have here, these 4 different prophecies that include Psalm 83 and Ezekiel chapter 38. You start looking at all of these things. We're watching everything race towards this fulfillment. You're talking about a strong Israel, strong IDF, in a weaker and weaker United States of America. What do you see next on the calendar?
Well, basically,
I mean, apart from the rapture, because we don't know when that's going to take place, but apart from that,
well, I personally am looking for this scenario to find fulfillment. I'm looking for the Iran prophecy. Iran's a subject of dual prophecies. Mm-hmm. Ezekiel 38, they're listed as Persia. Most of your viewers are familiar with that massive Gog and Magog invasion. Mm-hmm. They're also involved in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39, in a prophecy of Elam written by Jeremiah in 596 BC, before Ezekiel wrote about Persia around 586 BC. They were contemporary prophets of each other, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. But Jeremiah writes about Elam, which is the territory of modern-day Iran, when you look at a map, that hugs the Persian Gulf. That's where the Bushehr nuclear reactor is. Mm-hmm. That's where all of Iran's underground missile silos are. That's where Iran's portable rocket launchers are. That's where Iran's underground air base is, where they're getting the Russian Su-35 fighter jets over there. That's the area Israel has to fly over to get to Fordo, the underground nuclear facility, and Natanz and Parchin and those places, because we do suspect Israel's about to do that. So I'm thinking Israel's going to attack Iran, and they got to take out that area there of Elam with all those missiles, and they got the hypersonic missile now they just announced it can get to Israel in 400 seconds, which is 6.66 minutes. That's there in this territory of Elam. This is a separate prophecy than Ezekiel 38 with Persia. Persia's involved in that, not this. Jeremiah knew about Persia, but he doesn't list them. He talks about Elam specifically, territorially. And it says he's going to break the bow of Elam at the foremost of their might. So the bow meaning the missiles. And so Israel's going to try to go through there, and they're going to have to take out this whole section there, which, by the way, is where the Bushehr nuclear reactor is as well. And that's dangerous. And there's going to be 2 more Bushehr reactors built by Russia. They got a contract to build 2 more, so there'll be 3 there, depending on when this prophecy finds fulfillment. So I'm watching that, and I think that's going to fulfill Jeremiah 49, 34 through 39. We can get into more depth on the prophecy, but I think what then happens, Tom, is Iran's going to call on its proxies to come after Israel. And
okay, I'm going to ask you about that in just a second too, both a little bit more on Jeremiah 49 and what you foresee Iran is going to do regarding its proxies. What you think in Hezbollah and the Houthis and so forth. Let me come back to that in a minute. I'm looking at some of the maps that you have, and everybody else is able to see them too. Iran's double trouble in the latter years. Iran is in dual end-time prophecies. You talked about that. You have this great map that you have done, Persia versus Elam, so everybody can see that one. Then you have the Elam prophecy map that is written there, Jeremiah 49, along with Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 5. You have these great pictures of the missiles. When I look at you, so you have this one map here, you have Bushehr, and you have, you have 3 different, these are underground sites. They're listed 1, 2, and 3.
No, they're not. They're Bushehr 1 became operational around 2010. That's their crown jewel of their nuclear program. They're not enriching uranium there. It's not technically a major target for Israel. Matter of fact, it's concerning. If they were to strike that particular Bushehr reactor, it'd create a disaster across the Persian Gulf. Studies have been done that if contamination came from that nuclear reactor, wind patterns within 15 hours would come across to the Persian Gulf, and they estimate 40 to 100% of the populations over there would be adversely affected dramatically.
Wow.
Because 2/3 of the world's desalinization plants are over there, and they're concerned that it would contaminate the water and that sort of thing. I think it is a target, but Russia has contracts to build Bashar 2 in 2024 and Bashar 3 they're all right next to each other in 2026. So I think what's going to happen is Israel's going to, and it doesn't tell us who's going to do the fighting. We're not told who the enemies are, but obviously we could probably pin the tail on the Israel as someone's going to have to go against Iran right now. They're already preparing for that. In May of 2022, they did one of the largest military drills in their history called the Chariots of Fire, where they specifically were exercising to attack Iran's nuclear program and fight off the proxies around them in this exercise and deal with the casualties inside of Israel that they're anticipating would happen. This is all part of that Chariots of Fire drill back in May of 2022. So they're ready for this. But the point is, if they go flying in and try to take out Parchin and Bordeaux, Natanz and all those, and there's this Zagros mountain range, by the way, that you see on the map. It's separated Elam proper, geographically, always historically, with Persia proper on the east side rather, of the Zagros. 43% of Iran's population, there's 88 million people in Iran, 43% of them live in this Zagros mountain range, which comes into play in the prophecy. We'll talk about that in a minute, because it will be exiles. So it sounds like a humanitarian crisis. But if Israel is going to fly over to, one of the greatest defenses Iran has is not all these missiles and things they have, and they've got a lot of powerful missiles. They got the underground air base now, all in the Elam territory, is these Zagros mountains. That's very protective. Israel's got to fly over that before they can get over that to get to inside of Iran, Persia area. They're going to have to take out these missiles. That's why it says they're going to break the bow of Elam at the foremost of their might. Otherwise, they won't make it over the Zagros Mountains. Those missiles will take out those Israeli, because they've got advanced missile defense systems as well in Iran. So this is a very livid situation over there, Tom. So basically, in my estimation, Israel's going to go over probably in the very near future. They're prepared to do this, and they're going to try to take out those missile silos and things like that over there, that underground air base. Then they're going to have to fly over the mountains and take out Fordow and Natanz, where they're enriching uranium up to 84% now, which is a stone's throw away from a nuclear weapon at 90%. And I think what's going to happen is it's called this octopus doctrine in Israel now, and that is the octopus tentacles of Iran. All of the proxies, Hezbollah with 150,000 missiles pointed at Israel. Syria, who used 300 chemical weapons 300 times in the revolution. Hamas, who's lobs hundreds of missiles into Israel, as we know. The Houthis down below Saudi Arabia now say they've got precision-guided missiles from Iran that they could hit Tel Aviv with. The Shiite militias in Iraq, the Palestinian Jihad as well. So Iran is really ready, to come after Israel. And so at any given time, I think what's going to happen is Israel's going to attack them, maybe preemptively Iran, and then they're going to have to face off and square off with the proxies. And I think what's going to happen is Israel is going to experience casualties. I think Tel Aviv is going to get hit hard. And I think they're going to take out Damascus in Isaiah 17 and destroy the city overnight. It says in Isaiah 71, behold, burn against Damascus, behold, Damascus shall cease from being a city, it shall be a ruinous heap. And Isaiah 17:9 says, the desolation will be caused by the children of Israel, Israeli Defense Forces. And Isaiah 17:14 says, one night you see him, speaking of Damascus, in the masculine pronoun, but in the morning, he, Damascus, is no more. This is the portion of those who rob us and those who plunder us, meaning self-defense. Israel has to take out the city in self-defense.
There is a lot there. So as I look at it, it's for Israel to strike against Iran and take out their nuclear plans. Israel has to be ready to deal with all of the proxies that Iran has. And there's a lot of them. As you mentioned, the Houthis, I didn't know they could reach that far, all the way up to Tel Aviv. You have Hezbollah in the north, you have Hamas, you have all these other splinter groups that are there. Now, as you mentioned early on, you have Biden administration giving weapons to the Palestinians for terrorism, or to supposedly protect themselves against terrorism. You know what a joke that is. This is so for Israel to, so to speak, pull the trigger on this against Iran. They have to be. I mean, I'm looking at how are they even going to be prepared for that? for all of the other avenues they're going to be hit from. Then you have this other slide here from the Jerusalem Post. 400 seconds to Tel Aviv, Iranian media publishes Hebrew hypersonic missile threat. I remember when that was done, and you mentioned that. But so we look at this, all these different factors that Israel has to factor in. And if I remember right from Isaiah chapter 17, the destruction of Damascus, the way I've read it before is Israel takes some pretty severe hits, or appears to take severe hits in the northern part of Israel. Is that right?
Yeah, a matter of fact, if you want to go to Isaiah 17, verses 4-6, we should read that, and I'll kind of preface it while you're turning there.
Sure.
It does appear, when you read Isaiah 17, we certainly need to read Isaiah 17, 4-6, because it says in that day several times in Isaiah 17.
Okay.
And so read what happens in that day when Damascus gets destroyed.
But here it is, verse 4-6, Isaiah 17. In that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob will wane, and the fatness of his flesh grow lean. It shall be as when the harvester gathers the grain and reaps the heads with his arm. It shall be as he who gathers heads of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Yet gleaning grapes will be left in it, like the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 olives at the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in its most fruitful branches, says the Lord of Israel. You want me to read further?
No, that's good.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that, Tom. Okay. In that day, well, in what day?
Yeah.
In the day that Damascus is destroyed, Israel seems to take a hit, because it says his glory will fade. This is not good imagery. The fatness of his flesh will grow lean. That's not good imagery. He goes through the harvest cycles, the wheat, and then the grapes follow. But then the olive is the final harvest season. And I believe, if I got it correct, in Israel, olive trees are very common in Israel and in the Middle East. A fruited variety olive tree can have up to 500. I think it's 500 million. 500. I may not have the number right. At least 500,000 olives on it. It says if you superimpose an olive tree on the map of Israel, the uppermost branch, there'll be 2 or 3 olives left. What happened? And 3 or 4 in the fruitful boughs, taking it down from Haifa down to Tel Aviv. What happened to the other 490-some thousand olives, or maybe even be in the millions? They get hit. And there's just their fatness of their flesh grows lean, and their glory fades. They have to take out a city, Tom. And I think when they take out a city, and to defend themselves as a nation, the other Arab countries around them are saying, well, Israel's just been hit hard. They just took out an Arab city, the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history, the city of Damascus. And by the way, those countries right now, Saudi Arabia especially, are reforming relationships with Bashar al-Assad in Syria. This has been happening recently because the revolution is over now, and they've, under the guise of with the earthquakes and things have been going on, they've been started meeting with Bashar al-Assad in Damascus. So they're going to see that Israel's hurt. They've pulled out a nuclear weapon, probably a strategic nuke, to take out Damascus overnight. What's to say they won't take out Beirut, Amman, Jordan, Mecca of Saudi Arabia, Cairo of Egypt? And they have legitimate concerns because they found on Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 2, that Amman, Jordan goes next. It becomes a desolate mountain. It says there's an alarm of war in Rabbah of the Ammonites, Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 2. And it shall be a desolate mound. That's Amman, Jordan, the capital of Jordan. And Israel shall take possession of his inheritance. So, I mean, we live on the West Coast. Amman, Jordan to Damascus is about the distance of drive to San Diego to Los Angeles. They're really close together. So then we see the Israeli Defense Forces will take portion of their inheritance in Jeremiah chapter 49 as well. So from my perspective, Israel does take a hit, and they have to use a nuclear weapon, and they have to take out a city to make a statement. And that alarm, and I believe them and the other countries say, well, we should go against Israel now we can. That's when they try to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will become a cup of trembling in Zechariah 12:2. And that's when the captains of Judah take the people around about like a fiery torch, Zechariah 12:6, and take them out, because they'll have to, because there'll be an all-out war at that point. They're trying to maintain control over Judah and Jerusalem. Remember Jordan right now, and recently Abdullah came out and said that the Palestinians need to do what they have to do to maintain control, especially over Ramadan here, of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, because Jordan has control over the Temple Mount and the Waqf Society, WAQF, the Antiquities Society. Israel gave that back to them after the war in 1967. They're already telling the Palestinians, be prepared to maintain and control the Temple Mount against all threats. So, remember when they want, and Jerusalem is the third holiest city in Islam, even though it's not mentioned one time in the Quran. But so they're going to try to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem and not lose control of it, and that's when they're going to really get smattered.
I start putting all of these different things together, and it appears there are so many things that are going to be happening in the near future. We don't know when, but we're watching everything just move forward. And I do want to say this. I think the olive trees, what I just found on the olive tree, just so you know, maybe I'm wrong because there's different reports on how many olives are produced. One report says as many as 20,000 olives are produced or something. Yeah, that's what it says here. So there's different olives, but either way, it's a lot of olives. However many it is.
I think it's 500,000 ones I've seen, but okay, so
500,000. That's a big. Maybe these are
even
olives.
20,000.
Yeah, however many it is, a lot. I know that people are going to be commenting saying, "Oh yeah, well," and I just want to say, okay, we get there. There's going to be a lot of olives, everybody. We understand. We know how the comments work. Okay. With that, I want to ask you about the UAE Abraham Accords. I mean, if you go back a year, they were still alive and well. Go back 6 months. Well, there's still a lot of talk about the Abraham Accords. But you mentioned, hey, you look at everything, that whole dynamic is changing over there now. The entire dynamic is. Where do you see that going?
I see that going south. I mean, when Trump was in office and he was putting that all together with a twofold plan, they had the economic plan, which they introduced, and then they listed the security plan also, secondarily with Jared Kushner. And so they got the UAE involved, and then they got Bahrain involved, and then following suit was Sudan and Morocco subsequently. But the UAE, I mean, I read a headline in the Times of Israel, March 11th, the day after the brokered deal with Saudi Arabia and Iran. The UAE welcomes the Iran-Saudi deal as an important step for regional stability and prosperity. The UAE also, here's an article back in 2021, November 2021 by Reuters. The UAE is to send a delegation to Iran soon, the senior Emirati official says. A senior Emirati official said on Tuesday the United Arab Emirates would soon send a delegation to Iran as part of efforts to improve ties with Tehran. I hope it's sooner the better. And all our friends are aware of it, this diplomat says. The other one, too, is an interesting article. Iran border guard delegation arrives in the UAE in February of 2021. The UAE news outlet said the visit is part of a periodic visits between Iran and the UAE. So, they're jockeying around for relationships. New alignments are being made in the Middle East. And right now, because they're concerned the Biden administration is not going to support going with Israel in an attack, there's not going to be a real coalition here against Iran. Mm-hmm. They're jumping ship. They're finding ways that they can negotiate with Iran. I mean, there are Muslims, even though there's Sunnis, Iran, Shiites, Sunni Saudi Arabia and UAE, Shiites in Iran, and they're all concerned about who's going to establish the next Islamic Caliphate. Is it going to be a Sunni one or is it going to be a Shiite one? And they're concerned Iran's got its tentacles now with its hegemony with these proxies, and they're pushing for a Shiite Caliphate, and Saudi Arabia doesn't want that. Mecca is the holiest city in Islam, and they want to be the Sunni Caliphate, and that bickering, that schism between the factions of Islam. But guess what? They're Islamic, and they all don't like Israel. And that's the common denominator that's going to unite them. So Israel needs to be very concerned. Netanyahu's thinking that he's going to be able to normalize relationships with Saudi Arabia. Like I said earlier, that ship has sailed. I don't see that.
Well, things have really gone south. And as you said, they're just going to continue to go south. But at the same time, I got to ask you this, because a lot of people really have this concern this week. More people are starting to pay attention to what is really going on. But just a few things just that are worth just thinking about. As I look at everything, when I put it together, here's just some of the things that we've been watching. The news on the Petrodollar. Russia trades more in yuan than the dollar for the first time ever. We know about the different sanctions. We know about what you were talking about very early on. We have China and Russia, and you had a name for this new alliance that's being formed there. Banks are on the edge of the cliff, where we keep hearing more and more about what is going on with that. Trillions of dollars seem to be printed up and poured into the economy. We have threats of other wars. So we still have Ukraine issue. Who knows what the Biden administration and the warmongers here in the United States want to do? Doesn't look good there. So, I mean, we're watching so many different factors. And then you throw in, now we hear that there's threats of more pandemics. We have what appears to me to be, Bill, when I look at what's happened in the United States of America, as it plays out on the world stage, is in Romans chapter 1, God says, I'll give them over to a reprobate mind. And when you see, it's every single decision that the Biden administration makes, followed by all of the media outlets, followed by Hollywood and everything else, talk shows, it appears to be a reprobate mind. Every decision is just a really bad decision. It points to our own destruction. It's woke. When I would look at reprobate, I'd say, well, if I would look at one word that would define the mind that's gone reprobate, it's the woke mind. No decision can be made that's good. And as we watch what is happening to Israel by the United States of America, it's appalling. We knew it was going to come to this place someday where it's only going to grow worse, but it's not even about just saying, hey, we're going to abandon Israel. I look back to, remember when Netanyahu visited Congress during Obama administration and how ticked off Obama and his people were? Mm-hmm. I look at the Biden administration as being like Obama 2.0. Yeah. And it's Obama behind the scenes pulling these things, saying, this is payback for everything you did, Netanyahu, when you visited Congress. Paying you back. But it's going to be to the destruction of America. Israel is never going to go away. They've got a tough road ahead of them, no doubt about it. But Israel's not going to go away. But America, we're like in a free fall. Do you have any thoughts on these things?
Well, I do, and I agree with you on the Romans 1 analogy. Also, I would want to make a statement on the petro yen versus the petrodollar. We need to be watching that closely because China is the number one importer of oil from Iran and a very large importer of oil from Saudi Arabia. So it would be a real natural evolution to start trading in the petro yen versus the petrodollar. And with Jerome Powell on his interest rate increase rampage, the last thing we need right now is the petrodollar to fall off the shelf, right? So we got to watch that. But what you're talking about with America is not new news, Tom. I mean, we go back to Supreme Court decisions of the land in back 60 plus years, 1968, 69, 68, these are Supreme Court decisions. And we're basically saying to God, we don't really need you anymore. We got this. We're going to take prayer out of the schools. It's 1968 with us. We're going to take Bible reading out of the schools. Supreme Court decision 1969. You know what? We got too many children. We're going to have abortions, Roe versus Wade, 1973. Even though that's been overturned, it just threw the hot potato into the states' hands. It didn't abolish it in all states. Then you had 2013 when Obama was president. You had the DOMA Act was repealed. In other words, Defense of Marriage Act could not define the constitutionality, so they abandoned that. Then that sets the way when you can't define marriage to the Obergefell-Hodges case in 2015, approving same-sex marriages. And Biden has recently come out and reinforced that with the decree he signed not too long ago. So, Tom, I mean, we basically said to God, we don't need you anymore. So abandonment, wrath, and Romans 1 is what we've been experiencing. God is giving us over to a reprobate man, to lust of the flesh, to sexual perversion, those sorts of things. And when you see those things happening, Mark Hitchcock does a good spiel on this. The Greek word is paradiomi, when giving over 3 times he talks about. When you see those things happening in a country, it means he's not doing that. He's already done that. He's already given them over. Now you're getting the repercussions of God abandoning the country. We said we don't need you, and he abandoned us. Now when you say we're going to turn our back on Israel, now we're doing Genesis 12:3, God's foreign policy, which says, I'll bless those who bless you, speaking of Abraham, goes on through to his descendants. But I will curse those who curse you. The one thing we had in as our trump card, I'll use that word tongue in cheek, was we were supporting Israel. We always have been, right? But I'm concerned now that that support is waning, and we're putting a lot of pressure on Israel. We're arming the Palestinians. The reason they're agreeing to give these Palestinian training and guns and arm them is because when Mahmoud Abbas steps down, which could happen any time now, they're concerned that a lot of terrorist groups in the Palestinians are going to vie for power. And they're trying to have people, these trained troops by American training and rifles, try to prevent this power surge and transformation. It's like, what a terrible strategy, Tom. And so now we're arming people who are going to come against Israel. Will they really defend them? Will they really kill Palestinians in the West Bank? And I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's really awful to see what is happening. But at the same time, God said it was going to be this way. So we know, as we look at everything, hey, we just have more and more evidence that prophecy is about to be fulfilled, because we can see, Bill, you and I have been talking a long time, we can see everything converging, and man, is it converging. And I think here we are, it's Good Friday today, and we have Resurrection Sunday that is coming, and it's a reminder, Jesus came the first time to forgive us of our sins, and he is coming again. And as my friend Don Stewart says, you can't make this stuff up. Everything is happening. And Bill, I love how you laid everything out there today to help understand the things that are developing, the direction that things are going. And we have the Bible to remind us and strengthen us that God is sovereign. Everything is happening exactly the way God said it would. So for us, we press forward in courage and strength and faith, knowing God is in control. Bill, you have any final thoughts for everybody watching?
Well, I always like to say, quote my good friend Chuck Missler, who's our friend and who's now gone on to be with the Lord. He says, don't take our word for it. Be a Berean, Acts 17:11. They're more noble than those in Thessalonica, because they would hear these things, but they would search the scriptures daily to see if they'd be true. There are some people who think the Elam prophecy has already been fulfilled by Nebuchadnezzar II back in 586 BC period of time, the Babylonians. Some think it was fulfilled with Alexander the Great in the Greek Empire. I have lots of research that shows why that was not fulfilled back then. Some people say, well, Bill, you're just reading headlines and doing newspaper exegesis, but I would say there are people like Arnold Gaebelein in 1922 that said Jeremiah 49, Elam prophecy, was yet future. J. Dwight Pentecost in 1958 said it. John Wilver in 1999 said it was yet future, and Arnold Fruchtenbaum in his book Footsteps of Messiah in 1983 said it's yet future. These guys are not reading newspaper headlines. They've been on the lookout for a future fulfillment of Jeremiah 49, the Elam prophecy. And Tom, I'm thinking with what we talked about today, that stage is set.
Yeah, it certainly is. Lord Jesus, come quickly. Bill, thank you for joining me today. And listen, God bless you. God bless you all. Resurrection Sunday is coming, a couple of days away. God bless you. Talk to you later.